So Epic, in a reciprocal fashion, has closely followed the TSA's actions. TSA is always following what the public does, so Epic has been following what TSA has done. And we've noticed at least two things over the last few years. And number one is that, as Congressman Garrett discussed, the agency has gradually exceeded its authority. And number two, as it continues to expand its authority, it's moving from a more objective standards to more subjective standards and more nebulous. We see a lot of this risk-based assessment. You hear that a lot in the airports. You hear that a lot with VIPR. So that's really where TSA has moved. And to talk about first the body scanners, that's a prime example of number one, the agency exceeded its authority because it deployed body scanners without first taking public comment as was required by the Administrative Procedure Act. So that's one of the prime examples of the agency exceeding its authority. And two, moving to more nebulous standards. Initially, body scanners were designed to detect threats. But what we saw in the proposed rule is that TSA has now moved to look for anomalies, right? And what's an anomaly? And in our comments, as well as Cato, many other people brought up this issue. If you are a person who wears a medical device, oftentimes you go through the scanners and then you're pulled aside for an invasive pat down. We also had many members of the transgender community say, we're going through these body scanners and then our privacy is being violated because the TSA is looking for quote unquote anomalies. It's not really clear what they're looking for. And the same can be said about TSA VIPR. Number one, the agency is exceeding its authority. It's really encroaching on state and local law enforcement territory. If you read the New York Times article, you see that whatever TSA, to the extent that TSA has found anything, it's local and state crimes. It's evidence of prostitution. It's evidence of petty drug crimes. That's not why the agency was established, and that's not within the purview of the agency's jurisdiction. So number one, the agency exceeds its statutory authority, and number two is moving towards nebulous standards. The agency, and this relates to the GAO report from yesterday, is really deploying the behavioral detection operation. Once again, looking for risk-based type of behavior. We're not talking probable cause. We're not even talking reasonable suspicion. Now, why does this matter? Where do civil liberties come into play? Well, civil liberties absolutely depend on bright line rules, right? So the bright line rules, number one, grant individuals certain rights, and number two, impose obligations on the government. So you have the right to be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. And what does the government have to do if it wants to perform a search? It's obligated to obtain a warrant. But right now, what the TSA VIPR team has done is said, we're really adhering to, and Congressman Garrett hit the nail on the head, a general warrant standard. And in that purview, and in that instance, you don't have any type of rights to be protected when TSA approaches individuals. It's not state and local law enforcement saying, we have a warrant, we have probable cause, right? And then it also removes any obligation on TSA to search individuals with a warrant, to stop individuals subject to probable cause or reasonable suspicion. And when we're dealing with general warrants, that's where the privacy violations appear, because there's no check on any type of government power. They can stop for whatever they see fit. And also, one of the issues, another issue that arises is really the TSA VIPR program is missing what we always call for in the privacy community, which is meaningful transparency, meaningful accountability, and meaningful oversight. First, let's talking about transparency. Previously, TSA would say, oh, you know, we can't discuss exactly what we've uncovered. Right? There was no form of transparency. And not only was there no transparency in the results, as the New York Times article pointed out, then the TSA VIPR team started classifying their results. Additionally, with the transparency, this goes back to the fact that there aren't objective standards. It's not clear, it's not transparent what the government agency is looking for. Number two, there's no accountability with TSA VIPR programs. If a police officer was to come in here today, rifle through your bags, you could hold him or her accountable. You could say, you didn't do this with a warrant. You didn't meet your obligations. And that officer would be held to task. That's not the case with the TSA VIPR, because the TSA VIPR teams, because they're operating not pursuant to any type of warrant. They don't really have to answer your questions when you say, well, why would you search? And they say, well, this is an administrative warrant, which is very broad and amounts to a general warrant. And also administrative searches, rather, really are to only operate within the airport context. But what the agency has done is applied this outside of the airport context. And number 3, there's really no meaningful oversight. Congressman Garrett, the work that he's doing will lead to reining back in the agency. We did, however, get some form of oversight with the GAO report, and what it revealed is this behavioral detection, this risk-based assessment, isn't working, and it's encroaching on rights. Now, we get to solutions, because oftentimes in the privacy community, people always accuse us of yelling at the sky and asking, what are your worries? What are your concerns? Is privacy dead? And the answer is no. There are solutions. Number 1, legislation, like what the congressman proposed, to defund that type of program, to limit TSA's scope, put it back to where it started, which is in the airport. Number 2, the GAO report was a very good first step to basically call on Congress to also say, let's defund these behavioral detection operations because they're not effective. And number 3, we should really start looking more to the Privacy, Civil Liberties, and Oversight Board, P-Club, to get involved, because this is also within their jurisdiction. So P-Club was established to protect civil liberties and privacy, and they look at agencies who have a mission to fight the war on terror. And oftentimes, right now, they've really been heavily focusing on the NSA, like a lot of other congressional committees and everything. And EPIC has underscored that while that's a very good first step, TSA will also be within the purview of P-Club. And so this is an opportunity for that oversight board to look at programs like VIPR, to look at programs like TSA Secure Flight, which is the program that applies anytime you travel in the airport, to look at the body scanners, to expand really its agenda and look at other agencies who are encroaching on privacy and civil liberties. So I really think that those are what going forward can happen to make sure that individuals are not subject to warrantless and random and suspicionless searches. And another issue that is also coming up with the TSA VIPR programs is that there's an issue sometimes of profiling. When the agency doesn't know exactly what it's looking for, it gives agents almost like a carte blanche, and there's that French minor. It gives agents a carte blanche to just kind of stop whoever they're unfamiliar with, maybe someone they don't like the way that they look, any type of prejudices that they have coming to the table. But when we have objective standards, we can work to ensure that that doesn't happen.